Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video. Myself, Jonathan MS Pearce, the Ukraine War News Update, third part thereof for the 1st of December 2024. I've been busy putting up Christmas decorations today and thought I'd better get the geopolitics stuff out of my head and into yours. Let's start with general geopolitical shenanigans involving Ukraine. Kaja Kallas, a former Estonian Prime Minister, has visited Kiev alongside some others as well. So it is a privilege to be in Kiev alongside Costa and Commissioner Kos. In my first visit since taking up office, my message was clear. The European Union wants Ukraine to win the war. This war, we will do whatever it takes for that. Now, these people who have visited are some of the new top brass in the EU, so that's really good. Zelensky had a conversation with the new High Representative of the European Union for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy, Kaja Kallas. First of all, we discussed the need for air defense systems to protect life in Ukraine. We are coordinating our efforts to achieve the desired joint results. Good news there. Now, on less good news, there has been Jean-Luc Mélenchon. Well, first of all, France has seen, and I didn't report this yesterday, but there were several hundred people walking through Paris yesterday in support of French support of Ukraine. There's a pro-Ukrainian march. And today there were about 500 anti-Ukraine, or at least not wanting to give... well, not so much military aid to Ukraine, not wanting France to send its soldiers to Ukraine. And it was organised by actually a far-right political personality in France. And it's interesting that the propagandists were talking about this on the news and whatnot in Russia. And they were highlighting this happening in Paris today without, I think, giving reference to the fact that it was a far right that was doing that, because they're so sort of anti-Nazis, the Russians, until, of course, it's convenient for them not to be. Anyway, Jean-Luc Mélenchon, who is the spiritual leader of La France Insoumise, so that's the LFI, the far left in France, is at it again since French aid to Ukraine. This time he is whitewashing Russia's use of anti-personnel mines. According to him, this will now be anti-personnel mines. There will now be anti-personnel mines in Ukraine following the US decision to supply them to Ukraine. So having a go at that, talking about escalation and basically feeding the Putin narrative there, unfortunately, from the left in France. Now, Anton Gerashchenko is saying German MPs from the AfD party, so going from the left in France over to the right in Germany, and they met with Putin allies in Russia, according to T-Online. So this is a real shame. 3 MPs from the far right, Alternative for Germany, Alternative für Deutschland party travelled to Sochi, Russia in November, raising fresh concerns over the party's long-standing ties with Russian elites. All 3 have previously been investigated for illicit connections to Russia and China. Maximilian Krah visited Sochi in mid-November to meet with Oleg Voloshin and Nadia Sas, close associates of Viktor Medvedchuk, a key Putin ally. Voloshin and Sas are central figures in the Voice of Europe portal, accused of spreading pro-Russian propaganda in the EU and bribing European politicians. Krah described the meeting as private, claiming he spontaneously flew to Sochi from Istanbul and covered his expenses personally. However, his Brussels office has been linked to lobbying efforts tied to Medvedchuk. Earlier this year, Polish lobbyist Janusz Niedźwiecki, who had access to the European Parliament via Krah's office, was charged with espionage. Maximilian Krah is so embroiled with Russian, with the Kremlin. It's just, it's ridiculous that he's given the time of day in Germany that he presently is. AfD members Rainer Rothfuss and Ulrich Singer also travelled to Sochi in November. According to T-Online, they contacted Voloshin and Sus to secure participation in the BRICS summit. On the sidelines, they met Dmitry Medvedev. So Germany wanting to join BRICS as far as the AfD is concerned, or interested? Wow. On the sidelines, they met Dmitry Medvedev, with Singer posting a photo of the meeting on Facebook. So he is, well, Medvedev, when he's not drinking vodka, he's a former prime minister of Russia. And what was he, Deputy Security Council or something like that? The BRICS International Forum, a pro-Russia organisation connected to disinformation campaigns, financed their trip. Both have echoed Kremlin-aligned narratives. including criticism of German energy policies and calls for closer ties with Russia. Just a reminder, a few days before meeting the AfD MPs, Medvedev issued threats to Germany and other European countries, hinting at a repeat of World War II on his Telegram channel. Right, it's great though, talking about disinformation, as a really interesting interview of Rose Wang, who is COO of Blue Sky. You've got actually, interestingly, two women at the top of the chain in Blue Sky, talking about how Blue Sky is a really how it's billionaire proof and how it's got the infrastructure in place that even if it does get completely compromised, eventually you can take everything and move that to like a Yellow Sky or some kind of new version thereof. It's decentralized, and I think she's saying loads of really cool things here. Let's just because I think this is important for the information spaces. I think Blue Sky is something I'm really keen on and trying to move as much as I can across to Blue Sky. She talks about it here. Let's listen.
From both of us, tell us what it would look like to not have the algorithm deciding everything.
Absolutely. We are used to being trapped in one algorithm that's controlled by a small group of people, and they decide what we see, what type of content gets taken away, who to promote. And decentralization just means a more democratic way where users get to vote with their feet. So on Blue Sky, there are about 50,000 different feeds that have been created by other users. So there are feeds that are like either about cats, we have about maybe 5 cat feeds, more than 200 Swiftie feeds, and various other feeds that are either organized chronologically or based on what your followers are liking. And you can even use a politics filter to turn off politics or turn it back on depending on what your mood is that day. And so you actually get to interact with real people and have fun conversation again in a safe environment.
So what is that like? I mean, it just you know, I mean, because I'll be honest, X is a hellscape. It is not even. It's that. So what is it that people find out of the gate so appealing? I get the backside. I can sort of gear information and folks to what I like, but overall, what is the goal here for folks to really? What kind of experience are you looking for the user to have at the end of the day?
We're looking for users to decide for themselves what choice they want to have. It's about having user choice again. And so today in our world, we have social media that looks a lot like a small group of people who decide everything, what your moderation experience is, no matter where you are in the world. Who you get to interact with, and most times it's either biggest brands or the most polarizing posts, because at the end of the day, most social media platforms are trying to win over advertisers and not the end user. And so what we've done at Blue Sky is,
remember, if you're not paying for something, you are the product.
We have prioritized the end user as our primary citizen on our platform. And so what we care about is, does the everyday user with only a few hundred followers, do they have a great experience? And that's what's happening, is they're actually meeting real people. People with only a few hundred followers are getting hundreds of likes on their posts because they're no longer tied to an algorithm that's not promoting them because they're not paying for ads.
Rose, one of the big challenges, of course, for all social media platforms now is the concept of moderation, specifically how you fact check, what your responsibility is to those who spread propaganda, disinformation, misinformation, while also cultivating and allowing for an environment that welcomes various perspectives and point of views. How are you at Blue Sky walking that tightrope?
Well, I just heard you guys talk about what the responsibility is to women. And I think, first of all, there's so many women on social media platforms, and most of these platforms are run by men. Blue Sky is run by 2 women, me as the COO and Jay Graber, who's the CEO. And I think fundamentally, one of the biggest differences is we've just put safety as a priority. And what does that look like? It means last year when we had invite codes, we didn't open it up because we wanted to have a stronger moderation team. And we brought over Aaron Roderick, who used to be the head of election integrity at Twitter under Jack, to Blue Sky and lead trust and safety here at Blue Sky. And then there's our stackable moderation approach, and it goes back to, again, user choice. There are so many things in between intolerance, hate speech, and people having a bad experience that isn't governed on most social media platforms. There is deep fakes, rude posts, speculative information. And so on most other platforms, there's nothing you can do about those types of content. On Blue Sky, any user can go and create a labeler, and that can sit on top of our moderation service, where if you don't want to see political content, there's a labeler that hides all of that content for you, and all you have to do is subscribe to that. And so it's this type of approach that gives power back to the people, that allows social media to evolve and change without waiting on us, a smaller company, a handful of people to go make that change for you.
And then there's always
and it goes on and on. Really, really fascinating interview this, and it's the idea that you can choose how your stuff gets moderated. It's not being chosen for you, and it's that democratic approach. It's that you are you are enfranchised to make decisions about the platform for yourself, rather than having Elon Musk make a decision for you and thrust stuff down your throat, whether you like it or not. So fascinating. And lots of interesting articles out there at the moment. Blue Sky stepping up its bid to dethrone X by getting serious about verification and impersonation. So it's expanding its moderation team as the platform grows, and new verification and impersonation measures are coming. So it's really interesting. Was it Mark Hartlin? I saw a post of his today. He says, I've got 6 people impersonating me on Twitter, and I've reported all of them to Twitter, and they have not taken a single one of them down. I've got one person impersonating me on Blue Sky. I reported them, it got taken down. That's all you need to know, in my opinion. Blue Sky says it will have more to share on these features soon. So it seems like it's just a much more sensible approach to disinformation, to being forced to encounter people that you really don't like. That happens on X quite a lot, and it's all about user experience there for Blue Sky. Anyway. Right, something happened in the UK that's not to do with the Ukraine war particularly, and I only talk about Blue Sky because information is really important. I think disinformation is such an important topic, and I use a lot of I use these social media aggregators as my sources, and so therefore it's important to get that right and to explain to you why I favour Blue Sky at the moment. Anyway, I thought this was an interesting point. So what happened the other day, the present Labour government at the moment had someone who was 10 years ago, found out she's a transport secretary, and she is from Sheffield South or somewhere like that, up in the north, and she's well respected in her constituency. Actually, a lot of people genuinely like her. She's done a good job, both locally and also seems to be starting well in the transport. Now, there's been something like 6 transport secretaries in the last however many years. Like they've gone through them a lot. She has resigned because she was found to have done something fraudulent to do with false claim of theft on a company mobile phone or something like that. Anyway, she's resigned. It's too embarrassing. I'm going. Right now, I'm pointing this out because this is really important for me, that you've got someone that's done like relatively minor infraction compared to other people around the world, and she has resigned. And the Labour Party, I'm not trying to be pro Labour Party or anything, but they've said, yep, good, right, thank you for doing that. That's not acceptable. So Edward Hunter Chrissy exactly says my feelings here. I like the fact that the UK is still a country where one can throw out someone as powerful as a government minister for an old case of low-level fraud. The UK's Transport Secretary is out because she made a false claim of theft of a company mobile phone 10 years ago. And we have got in the US, like people who have got credible sexual assault allegations against them that have settled out of court, that have been X1, like some horrific things. Then you got freaking Donald Trump that's been done for 34 counts of X, Y, and Z, and you're like, and he becomes president. I just don't get it. I think we need to get back to this point where actually we do think it's important for people not to be morally reprehensible, and that's a real scale of infractions. But at the end of the day, I think it's good that a pretty decent politician has stepped down for doing something that is right down here on the scale of things you can do wrong. And I think it's not acceptable that in many countries around the world, you've got outright criminals and people who have done pretty horrendous things at the very top, and then nominating people for very important positions who have done far, far, far worse than she has done. Okay, We're going to go to Georgia. In Tbilisi, protests continue. Overnight, Georgian security forces tried to disperse the crowds away from the parliament building. This was last night, but could not prevent them from erecting barricades around the building. So this is important because it's looking a little bit more Euromaidan and Maidan protests as it goes on. They are now actively moving around Tbilisi University and blocking roads. What else do we hear? Protesters shoot at police with a fireworks cannon. It's absolutely incredible footage that came out about this. Georgian citizens are protesting against pro-Russian party that seized power in parliament by rigging elections. The authorities gave the order to disperse the protesters by force, but Georgians fight back in response. And they got this person with a fireworks cannon firing against the shielded police as they're standing there menacingly. And it just pretty crazy footage has come out concerning that. Right. In fact, here we can see the cannon from the profile here. Georgian protesters are using elaborate fireworks against the Georgian police, which in return use water cannons filled with pepper spray material. Wow. So, it's pretty hardcore. Yesterday's demonstrations in Tbilisi were one of the largest ever, with 200,000 estimated attending. Despite police crackdowns, protesters stood their ground till morning. The protest continues amid Georgian president's calls to stand until the end. So you can see there the huge crowds there in Georgia. So Anton Gerashenko says the protests in Tbilisi went on all night and currently continue. According to Visionaire, 200,000 people took part in the protests on the streets last night to protest against the reversal of Georgia's European course. Though the special forces tried to disperse the crowds, once again using water guns and tear gas, protesters refused to leave. Georgian media report protests are also happening in other cities across Georgia, including in small towns, and that's what's really important for me. The main events up till now, police managed to push the protests away from the parliament, well, so on and so forth. Lots of people arrested. Tbilisi jails are overcrowded. Some protesters are being sent to other cities. Some of those released from custody report they were brutally beaten by the police and not allowed access to medical services. These cases appear in local Telegram channels. And Prime Minister Kobad has denied the possibility of holding another parliamentary election despite the protesters' demands. He also said that the presidential election will take place, so that's to try and replace Zurishvili on December the 14th as planned, although current President Zurishvili said earlier she will not leave office, as I reported yesterday, as she considers the parliamentary election illegitimate. Now, this scene could be from the 2014 Kiev Maidan protests, where you've got people, behind barricades and coffee and drinks and whatnot, and it's all very positive. You've got, all sorts of images coming out of these protests. Some of them are really quite striking, such as that. So the third night, for the first time, anti-government protesters in central Tbilisi held their ground. This was yesterday through the night, despite police dispersals. This was enabled by a record 200,000 turnout out of Tbilisi's 1.2 million. That's incredible. Protesters built barricades, resist water cannons with firecracker volleys. In the morning, locals brought food for the demonstrators, and new people are replacing the ones who were standing throughout the night. Parents bring children to play with them on the streets to warm up. Bikers join protests. Taxi drivers block the police's advance to protesters during the night. Diplomatic boycotts grows. So this is important. Ambassador to the USA resigns following Italy's, Bulgaria's, Lithuania's ambassadors resigning, and the deputy foreign minister. Nationwide protests, demonstrations not only in the capital but other cities: Batumi, Kutaisi, Gori, Rustavi, Khashuri, Poti and Zugdidi, straining police resources. International isolation of ruling Georgian dream grows. EU calls for new elections. USA suspends strategic partnership with Georgia, and pressure on the public broadcaster to break its censorship and cover the protests fairly. Lots going on. Some good reporting there from various sources. Tim White says there are so many protesters in Tbilisi. There are different protests. So this is tonight. Outside the national broadcaster, they demand equal airtime on the news. At the parliament, the regular protest. And here outside the court where those arrested yesterday are appearing. Absolutely fantastic. I think this is really important that it continues and gains in momentum. Not only Tbilisi, says Jane Kiev, as we heard, Batumi, anti-Russian protests have broken out in every Georgian city. Really, really fantastic to see. And look at this, just double birdie with a Georgian flag on the back and resisting the water cannons. Take that. police. Courage of those Georgians, and especially of this woman, is amazing, says Tendar there. So fantastic stuff from these people. And I hope that they are able to affect serious change for what is good and right for democratic future of the country. Then we're going to go quickly to Syria. Iran pledges unwavering support for Syria. The Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi announced his trip to Damascus to deliver Tehran's message of backing the Syrian army and government, citing efforts to counter as sinister plots in the region. So you have this axis of nefarious entities, Iran and Russia, Hezbollah, supporting the Syrian Assad regime. So the SAA, they have retaken some areas north of Hama. So remember we talked about how Hama was being encroached upon by the rebels. Well, it appears that the areas north of it have been retaken by the Assad regime. Now, some are saying that actually they were never really properly taken by the rebels. It's just that the Syrian Assad regime just left them, and then they've just moved back into them fairly quickly. So it wasn't that they were lost and then retaken. That's how that is being sold by some people. But anyway, it appears that they are pushing back. Rebel forces managed to get inside the capital, Hama, but were unable to gain a foothold after SAA redeployed heavy equipment. Rebel control goes. As far as Suran, well, we don't need to know that particularly for the purposes of this video. According to Syria TV, Iran will send Afghan Shia militias. So that's interesting. So you got Shia and Sunni Muslims, and Iran is famously Shia, and you have these Shia militias in other places outside of Iran. So it appears there are some in Afghanistan. Afghan Shia militias led by the Revolutionary Guards advisors to fight in Syria alongside the Assad army in an attempt to retake Aleppo and its countryside. That's what Syria TV is reporting. So it's really heating up, as I think it spooked out probably Assad, the Russians and the Iranians, and now they could be throwing as much as they can into the area. But of course, how much can the Russians throw into Syria? So then we hear that, see a Turkish-backed Syrian rebels tearing down a Russian flag from a former Russian base in Syria and burning it. We wonder how much attrition has happened to the Russians, how much have the Russians suffered in Syria, and what do the people think of the Russians? It's good to see that from the rebels in Syria. Okay, so we'll keep an eye on that. Let's move on to the US, and we're going to start with Trump having consulted apparently Hungary's Viktor Orban on the Ukraine war, according to sources for the RFE Radio Free Europe. So Hungarian government sources said that the US President-elect Donald Trump sought Orban's opinion on strategies to end the Ukraine war, and I think that was soon after winning the election. I mean, this is bad news. If Trump is going to Orban for advice, you know it's going to be pro-Russian advice. So this is not good news for Ukraine, and quite a bit is being made of this as well. Right, we're going to go on to just another worrying appointment. I've long said that Tulsi Gabbard is the most worrying. This is going to be a close second, possibly. I mean, Hegseth for the DOD, I think, is worrying. RFK Jr. for the health services is worrying. Those three should just not get the jobs. Actually, Kash Patel seriously shouldn't get the job he's just been nominated for. This is deeply, deeply worrying. So, quote from Tim Nichols in a piece in The Atlantic. In a stunning reversal of political polarity, a significant part of the law and order GOP now regards the men and women of federal law enforcement with contempt and paranoia. If Trump's goal is to break the FBI and undermine its missions, Kash Patel is the perfect nominee. This is a really, really worrying nominee. So the FBI arrested more than 1,250 January the 6th insurrectionists who falsely claimed the 2020 election was stolen. Now the Bureau is about to be headed by a man who agrees with them. Morale will be the first thing to disappear at this law enforcement agency, but not the last. Why I'm reporting this in this video is because it does have an effect on intelligence gathering. Although it's not the CIA, the FBI is important. Now, Ben Hodges says the 20th century Peruvian strongman Oscar R. Benavides once stated a simple principle that Trump appears to follow. This is the mantra. If you're going to remember anything today, remember this. For my friends, everything. For my enemies, the law. The implication here being my friends don't get the law. They get to be above the law and, in this case, run the law. My friends are the law. and my enemies will be victims to the law. So it falls now to the Republican members of the Senate to decide whether Trump can impose this formula on the United States, says General Ben Hodges. Shashank Joshi from The Economist says, with Trump's announcement that he intends to nominate Kash Patel as FBI director, and even if he only serves in an acting role, it's clearer than ever that the US intelligence community is going to face extreme disruption. Shashank Joshi wrote on that a couple of weeks ago. Patel, quote from the Wall Street Journal, Patel, one of the FBI's sharpest attackers, said in a September interview, so this is very recent, on the conservative podcaster Sean Ryan's show, so the second biggest show on Spotify. So when I said to you previously that the right wing control all the main information spaces on political information spaces on, say, Spotify in the podcast world, Sean Ryan's actually one of them. Anyway, but I would call him adjacent, but nevertheless. That Kash Patel said, quote, shut down the FBI Hoover building on day one. That he would shut down the FBI Hoover building on day one and reopen it the next day as a museum to the deep state. So this guy is totally anti-deep state, wants to clear everyone out and wants to use the FBI to hunt down all of Trump's people who have annoyed Trump or that he perceives as persecuted Trump. This is going to be one massive retribution campaign. This is exactly what you see when dictators get to run a country. This is just autocracy 101. Shashank Joshi again, but referring to the Washington Post, says Patel is unqualified, inexperienced, and bent on retribution. Bodes badly for the rule of law and politicization of intelligence. That's Shashank Joshi saying that. Quoting from the Washington Post, President-elect Donald Trump said Saturday that he planned to replace FBI Director Christopher Wray with Kash Patel. Now, what's important there is James Comey was replaced. Usually the FBI, whoever's in charge of the FBI, runs for 10 years and is usually seen as beyond politics, like not really a political appointment. James Comey was in charge, and then before his 10-year tenure was over, Trump really controversially replaced him in his first administration with Christopher Wray. But the lucky thing about that is that Christopher Wray was a kind of institutional guy. He was an okay guy. It was controversial to have ousted James Comey, but at least he replaced him with someone who was broadly all right. He's now going to come back in and get rid of Christopher Wray before his 10-year tenure is up. So he's again controversially sacking an FBI director and then bringing Kash Patel, who is deeply incorrect for this role. Inexperienced, inadequate, so on and so forth. This is Sam Stein and Tim Miller talking about this with, I think, Tim Nichols.
Welcome back. President-elect Donald Trump announced via Truth Social moments ago that he is nominating former Chief of Staff to the Secretary of Defense under the first Trump administration, Kash Patel, to be the next director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Now, Patel had several other notable roles during the first Trump term. What's notable here is that Christopher Wray, who Donald Trump chose as FBI head in 2017 after firing James Comey, Christopher Wray has not yet finished his 10-year term. So Trump would have to fire him in order to get Kash Patel into that post. Tom and Tim are back with me to unpack all of this. Look, Tom, we were talking in the last block about this. Among his other faults, Kash Patel is a conspiracy theorist, and he would be another one in a line of them who would be going to the Trump administration should he be confirmed. And he also was an organizer or a key component of the J6 insurrection. I mean, what does it say about having that type of personality in your next term? It just completely obliterates any recognition or culpability for anyone who was involved in that riot, as far as I'm concerned.
Oh, yeah. I mean, Donald Trump's been trying to erase history and retcon that whole business into, just another day in Washington. And unfortunately, he's been somewhat successful trying to memory hole at least some of it. But Patel is, and I think Tim is absolutely right, when it comes to the danger to our democracy, Patel is about as dangerous as it gets. Not because he's that much of a true believer in anything, but because, and I would recommend that people take a look at a piece that we had about him in the Atlantic, he believes in nothing except serving Donald Trump, except his own interest. And what you're going to see is Donald Trump creating an administration of people who really don't care about the interests of the United States.
This is so important. I listened to an interview of Amy Klobuchar, who is a Democratic senator, and she said, look, we're just really interested in finishing this term before January the 20th and just doing our job, serving the American people. And everything she was saying was all about, look, we're here to serve the American people. Like, that's why we do things. And here, everything that Trump is doing is about serving himself. Honestly, just... This is what is most worrying. And the reason I'm including this in the Ukraine war video is because Ukraine is fighting for democracy, and they're fighting to enter into hopefully a new future where they have a much more transparent, democratic political landscape. And it appears like the US that has been helping them is now taking a turn to go down an autocratic route. Now, you may be a big fan of the Republicans and of Trump, but I'm sorry. I think if you're a fan of transparent and open, free and fair elections and democracy, then this should be very worrying, because the people he's choosing are not people who are interested in making America better in terms of, like, I really want to put things in place. I've got this real sense of an idea of what America should be. These are people like, Trump, what do you want me to do for you? I will go and hunt down whoever you want me to hunt down. That was what Matt Gaetz was. That's literally why Trump nominated him, because that's what he said he'd do on that aeroplane. And you've got Kash Patel, who is actually quite ideologically devoid, although he is a big fan of kind of Project 2025, is going to be this attack dog that's just going to go and serve Trump, but not serve the people. And I think there's a real difference there. And honestly, just go and look at all the people that Trump is getting in to these positions and wonder why he's suggesting those people. Is it to serve Trump? Or is it because these are the right people to serve the United States of America and the people of that nation?
They're there to build an authoritarian cadre and to put themselves beyond the reach of the rule of law. And if you want to be beyond the reach of the rule of law, one of the first things you're going to want to capture is the FBI. Because the other thing this says, putting Patel there, it says the FBI is no longer in the law enforcement business. It's certainly not in the counterintelligence business, which our enemies will be very happy to hear. It's in the business of protecting Donald Trump, furthering Donald Trump's interests, and making sure that Donald Trump's enemies are investigated and that Donald Trump's friends are given a free pass. I mean, this is really, I suppose if we still had the ability to be shocked, it's shocking, but I think this is something many of us saw coming, and shouldn't be that surprising. But it's an incredibly dangerous development.
So we're talking about counterintelligence. We're talking about, like, investigating people who have Russian influences in the United States. What is a sort of approach that someone like Kash Patel is going to take for nefarious foreign influences? And I would argue that that's going to be down his list of interests. And in fact, someone like Paul Manafort, he would be happy to allow. Paul Manafort is right at the heart of everything Trump and has been since 2016. And I just think this is a dangerous era for the United States, where all the institutions and the rule of law are being compromised. And people are being put in place, or at least nominated to be put in place, who are the exact people that someone like Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping would want. But particularly Vladimir Putin. I mean, China is slightly different kettle of fish, actually. It's deeply, deeply worrying. And actually, there's a really good interview there that the Bulwark are playing that is a good analysis of Bulwark do. And he goes back to Tim Miller looks at Bill Barr's book. And Bill Barr, who was the AG, the Attorney General for Trump, talks about how Kash Patel then, he said he would have been put in position in the FBI over my dead body. That's what Bill Barr said in the 2016 to 2020, and now he's being nominated for leading the FBI. That was for, like, deputy FBI or something like that. It's like, over my dead body, that's going to happen. That's an absolutely terrible choice. So this is really, really worrying. This all says Trump's corruption truly knows no bounds. Donald Trump has selected Charles Kushner, a disgraced real estate developer, and Jared Kushner's father as US ambassador to France. Kushner, who served 14 months in federal prison after his 2005 conviction for tax evasion, illegal campaign contributions and witness tampering, was pardoned by Trump in 2020. Following his pardon, Kushner became a significant donor to Trump's campaign, Drain the Swamp My Ass. And when we go back to that Labour minister being, oh, sorry, I did something dodgy with my mobile phone, right, you're out, you're not secretary. It's Trump's like, come in, you were in prison, brilliant. Well, that's exactly who we want, because I know you were Jared Kushner's father. You are Jared Kushner's father, and actually, you're giving me loads of money. Anyway, I'm going to put you in as ambassador in France. Now, the French newspapers have gone nuts over this. By the way, interesting that as far as I understand it. So anyway, these nominations are just insane. It's got to be the worst year ever for American political nominations. Anyway, I talked to you yesterday about this morning actually, about Lex Friedman possibly going over to Kiev to talk to Zelensky. And Lex Friedman speaks Russian, and it's interesting. They could actually speak in Russian in that. But anyway, Jake Bro casts another opinion on this, saying Lex Friedman has agreed to go to Kiev to interview Zelensky. This is really important, because for the last 3 years, Lex Friedman has only had on guests who have been wrong about everything. Seriously, every guest that Lex Friedman has had on his show the last 3 years to talk about Russia and Ukraine has been proven wrong by time. Now, some people have been coming on saying, I really like listening to Lex Friedman. He's really good. He's really this and that. Other people are like less so. Other people are saying he was good, then he was not so good. And lots of people giving their opinion on why where it went wrong for Joe Rogan, etc., etc. But Joe, you can agree or disagree. I don't know. I've not listened to Lex Friedman, but Jake Bros certainly is saying that anyone he's had on for Russia and Ukraine has been wrong. Here is former CIA agent Andrew Bustamante, episode 310, confidently saying in August of 2022 that Ukraine would fall before winter because Germany needed Russia's gas to survive the winter. Andrew also states that Russia would take Odessa and Moldova before the winter of 2022. This guy was wrong about everything, and these are the kind of people Lex has been exclusively talking to the last 3 years. So the idea is, okay, this is an anecdote, one single person being wrong, but he generally gets on people who are properly wrong, and that's bad for his audience. I think Andrew Bustamante is a great guy. We're both prior missileers in the US Air Force. He has interesting opinions on lots of topics, but Andrew has been consistently wrong about Russia and Ukraine for 3 years straight and won't be honest about it. Now, it's going to be interesting if this does happen, and it might be really good that you get that Friedman allows his audience to hear, some proper things about Ukraine, straight from the horse's mouth, if you like. Now, I just want to cover this comment from my thread, and thank you. This is someone who's really annoyed with me, but who's a member, says, nothing has peed me off more than, nothing JP has said has peed me off more than him saying this morning that Ukraine is more important to US national security than Afghanistan. So this was, I didn't actually use the term national security, I don't think. I said just more important, and I meant geopolitically. So I had a chart up that said, here's the amount of money they spent on the Afghan conflict and the Iraq conflict and the Ukraine conflict. And actually, Ukraine in total has been very small. But even if you split it per year, by the way, I think Ukraine still comes up vastly smaller than the other two. In fact, half as big as the next lowest. So Iraq and Afghanistan cost the US way, way more. And actually, everyone's moaning way more about Ukraine. And my point was Ukraine's far more important. I said Ukraine is, and I think will always be, far more important than the conflict in Afghanistan and Iraq. Now, your man didn't like this, and I do apologise. Thank you for saying this comment, but I would absolutely stand by my words, and I'll tell you why. So he says nothing's peed me off more than this. Europeans crap on American international knowledge all the time, so it's mind-blowing to me when they act like 9/11 didn't happen and conflate Iraq with Afghanistan. I didn't conflate Iraq with Afghanistan. They were two separate things on the chart, which literally the whole point of what I was saying was not conflating them. They were separate on the money spent. So money spent on Iraq, money spent on Afghanistan, and money spent on Ukraine. And I was saying that's the least being spent on Ukraine, but it's the most important conflict. Now we can talk about, let's talk about that. So by most important, Iraq was weapons of mass destruction, which weren't there. Let's get Saddam Hussein out as a horrible man, but then it got replaced by stuff that was more unstable. And it was really about probably oil, in effect. geopolitically, it didn't have these like knock-on effects that were huge. Now, Afghanistan was more about a response to 9/11 and trying to find Osama bin Laden, who actually wasn't in Afghanistan anyway. And so going into Afghanistan, changing over regime, getting rid of the Taliban. But as far as the geopolitical impact that had, that was more about a psychological release for the American public to see retribution for that. But in terms of like objective geopolitical importance, it wasn't all that important. In fact, there's an awful lot of money was spent on trying to change a country. In the end, it became like, let's make Afghanistan better, put loads of money into training them up so they can be democratic themselves and blah, blah, blah. And then pulled away from there and all fell apart. But the knock-on effect to that wasn't like massively significant. Regionally, yes, but not in terms of the history of the world, I think. Ukraine, Russia, and I may continue to annoy you, but it seems amply true that what does Ukraine and Russia have that Iraq and Afghanistan don't have? We've got hydrocarbons. So let's start with nuclear missiles. Neither of those countries had nuclear missiles. Neither of those people had nuclear missiles. So that's one thing. This is potentially a nuclear conflict. And in fact, Ukraine not having nukes and the Budapest Memorandum is, arguably why they were invaded. Hydrocarbons and the global impact of an energy crisis that came out of that wasn't affected with either of those conflicts, at least not so much. You have BRICS. You've got the hegemony of the US at the top of the hegemonic ladder that is being challenged by Russia. Russia is a superpower. Neither Iraq nor Afghanistan were a superpower. There were no other countries that were allied to Afghanistan and Iraq that were challenging the US. I mean, I could go on and on and on. I could talk about North Korea, Iran, Russia, and then talk about, even connections to Hezbollah and Syria, as we're talking about at the moment. This is a whole 4D game of chess that is centered around Ukraine and Russia. This is the single most important conflict in the world since 1945. That's my claim. Now, if that annoys you, fair enough. But the fact that and I really appreciate this. I'm not having a go at you, Taryn, by the way. Thank you for being a member. Like, goodness me. But I'm saying that if you are reacting so emotively, then what that tells me is actually your position is probably an emotive position. In other words, it's a psychological thing. Like 9/11 affects Americans in a way that people outside of America can't really comprehend. But that's not a kind of rational, almost objective geopolitical situation. That is an American psyche situation. And that's not what I'm talking about. And for me, so it depends how you interpret my words, most important. I'm telling you how I meant those words. I mean geopolitically important. That's why this channel exists, right? So the geopolitics of the Ukraine conflict are far more important than the geopolitics of going into Iraq and the geopolitics of going into Afghanistan. Especially when, the main reason you went into Afghanistan was about Osama bin Laden. He wasn't even there. So, I stand by my words, and actually I could talk to you for another 20 minutes on why Ukraine is as important as it is. But thank you very much for that comment. I mean this in the nicest kind of interlocution, conversation, discussion. Disagree with me. I piss a lot of people off. Believe you me. You only have to speak to my partner. Me spending this amount of time on here, but I think. With all due respect, I think you're wrong. Take care, guys. I really appreciate all of your support and conversations that we all have. I'll speak to you soon.